welcome to Cinema Echoes South Australia. My name is Erica. If you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Now today we're going to talk about the fabulous York Picture Theatre. It was situated at 62 Rundle Street in the city of the CBD of Adelaide. It occupied the first floors of this 8-storey building, which I think was one of the tallest buildings in Adelaide at the time. Now the building was built for the Greater Wondergraph Company, who in the early 1920s had sold the last of their suburban theatre chain to Clifford's. They intended instead to concentrate on theatres in the CBD of Adelaide. Now, building a cinema was an enormous expense. It's estimated that the cost of building this cinema alone was around about £120,000. And in order to keep up with the interest on the loan, it would need to make about £20 a day. So the York Theatre was built on the northern corner of Rundle Street and Gawler Place. You can see on the map the layout of the theatre. You've got that very narrow entrance that opens up to a more spacious theatre at the back, more towards further down Gawler Place you go into Fisher Place. The architect was Chris A. Smith, a very familiar name in theatre architecture at the time. And as I said, a very unusual design for him, but it was obviously built for the land space that he had available. So once built, the York was considered one of the finest in Adelaide of the period. Now, prior to World War I, picture theatres had been more traditionally seen as an entertainment aimed at the working classes, and as such, prices had been kept low. Furnishings had been kept very simple. Little more than wooden benches in some, or wooden seats in some theatres. But as I said, after World War I, there had been a decided shift towards attracting a wealthier audience. But in order to attract a wealthier audience, the theatre themselves needed to be nicer. They needed to spend more money on nicer facilities and furnishings. Now, reading this article that was in the Daily Herald in November the 2nd, 1921, we read that upon entering the York, patrons were met with all the latest modern comforts. Now, with this nicer environment and more investment, the proprietors could and would charge more for the seating. The York wanted to appeal not only to the working class, but also to the middle class. If they could sell some of the seats at 4 shillings, that would help go a little towards their investment. Here we have a copy of the souvenir program that would have been given to each attendee on the opening night, which was held on the 5th of November 1921. So the program actually furnishes us with some information about the York itself. It tells us here about the sort of service that the patron should expect, the comfort, seating, etc. It also tells us who the managing director is. It gives us a phone number to call them. I don't think that's going to be connected anymore. It gives us the prices, and as we can see, the day sessions are different than the night sessions. It also tells us about that there are continuous sessions from 11 a.m. until 5:30 p.m. Now, I would assume that would be to catch the weary shopper. There was a full orchestra at 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon and also at 8 p.m. in the evening. And we can see, as I said, the prices for the day and the night sessions were different. So the York Theatre over this years would actually change ownership on quite a frequent basis, to be honest. But however, it kept the name the York, which is quite unusual, really. So over the years, of course, it was built by the Greater Wondergraph Theatre Company in 1921. In 1929, it was purchased by Union Theatres. Then the Greater Union Theatres took over Union Theatres and all their assets were amalgamated into Greater Union Theatres. In 1940, it was a part of SA Theatres, and then on to Ozone Theatres in about the 1946. And in 1960, Hoyts did own it for a very short period, I think about 3 months. The entrance to the theatre was, as Ross Thorne describes, more in keeping with US design than Australian. But I think that is, as I said earlier, it's probably Chris A. Smith would have probably had, well, you've got to work with the land that you had. And that was the land layout that he had. And other than moving the ticket box and the entrance into Gawler Place, there's not much else he could have done. And that would not have been ideal in Gawler Place. The idea of having a cinema in the CBD was to catch the passing foot traffic, and Rundle Street, of course, was where all the department stores were. So they really needed to be on Rundle Street to do that. Now, this photo is dated 1936, and it shows us the York as it appeared in 1936. Claude C. Woods was the general manager at the period, and he noted that the star with the greatest pull power was Warner Oland. Now, Warner was the star of the Charlie Chan series of films, so they were obviously quite popular in Adelaide. Now, he beat out some pretty top competition, to be honest. Charlie Chaplin came in second, and Betty Davis came in third. The seating capacity was around 1,769 patrons. So here we have zoomed in on the previous photo, so you can see that the ticket box is a ticket island, and the stairs. Now, the stairs were manufactured sourcing marble from Angaston, which is a country town in South Australia, not too far from Adelaide. And they, as you can see, are on either side of the building. Now, these would lead up to the foyer and the lounge. In 1938, the actual entrance would be renovated and modernised, and part of the ticket office would actually be moved to the left-hand side of the entrance. Now, the keen eye would notice that the evening session had changed from 8 p.m. down to 7:30 p.m. Now, John Adey gives us a wonderful description of the entry into the York in his article in Kino magazine, autumn 2001 edition. Adey tells us that from every seat there was a clear viewpoint to the screen. There were no supports in the way for anywhere you sat. And as you can see in this photo, the dress circle was above the stalls, and above it were two great domes. The main colours were brown and buff, and the walls were covered with Australian landscapes, which I think you can see them on the sides of the walls in the dress circle. They would later be painted over with further renovations. So in 1944, when this photo was taken, the population of Adelaide was around 620,000 people. There were about 13 cinemas in the CBD of Adelaide at the time, and Adelaide came in third, only behind Sydney and Melbourne with a number of cinemas in its CBD. So further in this article that John Adey wrote for the Kino magazine in autumn 2001, he writes about the setup of the York. He says that if you were to take the lift up to the fourth floor of the building, that as soon as those doors opened, you could hear the projectors and the sound of the movie echoing throughout the corridors. Now you can see in this photo, if you look to the back of the York building, you can see the height of the cinema at the back of the main building. So by 1953, the building was purchased by the Adelaide City Council and then leased back to the Waterman family. The council had purchased the building with an eye of already getting ready to widen Gawler Place. In 1954, the number of cinemas in the CBD had reduced from 13 down to 12. The York in 1957 installed CinemaScope, which would require movement of the screen. I think the screen was brought forward slightly. And for a short period, Hoyts took over in 1960. About 3 months they were in place for. But from 1953 onwards, and with the purchase by the Adelaide City Council, the York's days were already numbered. Now, the York closed on the 30th of September 1960. Society was changing. More and more people were buying cars, moving to the new outer suburbs, and shopping at their local shopping centres. They no longer needed that trip into the CBD to visit the department stores that they loved. About 1961, 127,000 Adelaide families had actually purchased a television. And in the same year, the number of cinemas in the CBD had reduced down to 9. Along with the York, there was the Curzon, the Rex, the Star, the Mayfair and the Civic. They too were all casualties of the changing social habits. Thank you for your time today. I hope you enjoyed my vlog on the York Picture Theatre. It's the one theatre I really wished was really still around so I could look at. I think the building itself is very interesting. As Ross Thorne said, it's quite an unusual design for Australian picture theatres. Now, if you want some idea of how thin the actual building was, if you're able to, go to the corner of Rundle Street and Rundle Mall, and Gawler Place, and you'll see where, there's H&M on the corner there now. That's where Burke's and David Jones used to be. And the opposite side, this is on the northern side of Rundle Street or Rundle Mall, the old Edmonds building, I think it's still called Edmonds building. That was a building that the Yorker butted up against. Now, if you just turn around and look at the building opposite, on the other, looking towards the south side of Gawler Place, that building would have been probably, gives you an idea of how wide the York would have been. Not very wide at all. So anyway, thank you very much for your time. I do hope, as I said, you enjoyed my vlog. I now also have a Facebook page called Cinema Echoes South Australia. If you would like to become a member of that page, and that's where I will put all my updates on my blog, everything. So if you want just a one place so you can keep up to date with everything, that's where to go. And I'll put a link further along. Thank you again. Bye-bye.